Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving into a place that's fueled countless books, movies, and those late-night internet rabbit holes, the Bermuda Triangle.
Also known as the Devil's Triangle, which, sounds pretty
It
ominous.
really does.
And you might picture this area as this, like, uniquely perilous zone where the rules of physics just, well, they don't seem to apply.
Right.
But here's something that might surprise you right off the bat. Official bodies, like the U.S. Coast Guard, even the big insurance folks at Lloyd's of London, they actually state that disappearances in this specific patch of ocean don't occur with statistically greater frequency than in other large, heavily trafficked
Wait,
areas.
hang on. So one of the most infamous mysteries on the planet might not actually be statistically weirder than anywhere else that's just big and watery.
Kind of counterintuitive, isn't it?
Yeah. This area, generally located between Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico, its massive sources estimate anywhere from 500,000 to maybe 1.5 million square miles. And interestingly, its exact borders aren't even officially recognized.
Exactly. No line on the map from, say, the U.S. Board on Geographic Names.
Huh.
And the legend itself, it's not ancient history. The actual term Bermuda Triangle was only coined back in 1964.
By Vincent Gaddis, right? In like a pulp magazine.
That's the one, Argosy magazine. And then it really exploded into the public consciousness, what, about a decade later?
Yeah, 1974, Charles Berlitz's book, that was huge. And he was already interested in paranormal stuff, Atlantis.
He definitely leaned into the more sensational explanations, absolutely. Atlantis, strange energies, that sort of thing.
So our mission in this deep dive then, using everything from naval reports and scientific analysis to, yeah, those wild Reddit threads,
Uh-huh.
is to try and cut through the noise.
Right. Are these disappearances down to unique natural hazards, some truly supernatural force? Or could it be, as some people argue, that the mystery itself is largely, well, manufactured?
Okay, let's start by setting the scene. We need to talk about some of the most famous cases, the ones that really built this area's spooky reputation. These are the stories that make you think, okay, something weird is definitely going on here.
Yeah, when you look back, certain incidents really stand out. They cemented the triangle's lore. Take the USS Cyclops in 1918.
Okay.
This was a huge Navy cargo ship, like 540 feet long, vanished.
Yeah.
306 crew members on board, traveling from Barbados to Baltimore.
Just gone.
Just gone. No distress call, no wreckage ever found, nothing.
Wow. And wasn't there something about its sister ships, too?
Yes, that adds to the chill, like you said. Two of its sister ships, the USS Proteus and USS Nereus, they also disappeared in similar circumstances later, in 1941. Both were carrying bauxite cargo.
Any ideas why?
Well, some sources mention potential design flaws in that specific class of ship. Or, for the 1941 disappearances, it was wartime, so U-boat action is a possibility. But still, vanishing without a trace. It's unsettling.
Definitely. And then there's the big one, maybe the most iconic, Flight 19.
Flight 19, 1945. A squadron of 5 U.S. Navy bombers, Avenger torpedo bombers, on a routine training flight out of Florida.
5 planes.
Yeah.
14 crew members. All vanished.
All vanished. And this is the one with those chilling radio transmissions.
Yeah, the report said the pilots' compasses were malfunctioning. They felt completely lost. There's that quote attributed to the flight leader, Lt. Charles Taylor, something like, "We are entering whitewater. Nothing seems right."
We don't know where we are. The water is green. No white. Yeah, that's the one. Sends
Yeah.
a shiver down your spine.
And didn't a rescue plane also disappear?
It did. Compounding the horror, a Martin Mariner rescue plane sent out specifically to find Flight 19, it also vanished, with 13 men on board.
So that's 7 aircraft in, 27 people? Gone.
In one incident. No trace of any of them ever found. Now, the Navy's own investigation at the time, it did heavily suggest pilot error played a big role.
Oh, so.
The report, though ultimately inconclusive about the final fate, pointed towards Lt. Taylor, the flight leader, becoming disoriented. Maybe mistaking some islands he saw for the Florida Keys, which were actually much further west.
Oh, so he might have led them further out over the open Atlantic?
That was the leading theory in the report, that they flew east instead of west or north over open sea until, tragically, they just ran out of fuel. But again, the report was officially inconclusive.
Wow. So even the most famous case, right from the start, had a potential, albeit tragic, human explanation being considered.
Exactly. It wasn't immediately jumped on as purely supernatural by the official investigation, though the lack of wreckage certainly fueled the mystery.
Okay, what about other cases? The SS Marine Sulphur Queen?
That's another significant one, yeah.
Right.
1963, a tanker carrying molten sulfur vanished near the Florida Keys, 39 people on board.
Any clues there?
Only a few bits of debris, life preservers. Sources did note the ship was apparently in pretty poor condition, and the cargo itself, molten sulfur, is inherently dangerous, prone to explosion or releasing toxic gas.
So vulnerabilities there too. Things that could explain a disaster without needing, a portal.
Potentially,
Hmm.
yes. These background details often get lost in the more sensational retelling.
And the lore includes even older stories, right?
Yeah.
Like those ghost ships found abandoned.
Mm-hmm. Like the Mary Celeste or the Carol A. Deering. They weren't disappearances in the same way the ships were found, but empty. And sometimes older incidents, like Thomas Lynch Jr., a signer of the Declaration of Independence vanishing at sea in 1779, get sort of retroactively included to add historical depth.
So you take all these stories together, the vanishings, the ghost ships, and it paints this picture of a cursed, uniquely dangerous area.
Precisely. These cases are the pillars holding up the legend. But, okay, with those powerful stories in mind, let's shift gears. Let's look at what science and official organizations actually say.
Because their perspective offers a very different picture, you said.
A very different picture. You mentioned earlier the official stance from bodies like NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the U.S. Coast Guard is pretty clear.
They say no supernatural stuff, right? And no more incidents than elsewhere.
That's the gist. They contend there are no supernatural explanations needed, and, importantly, that disappearances here do not happen more often, statistically, than in other large, busy ocean areas. They attribute incidents primarily to two things: nature and human fallibility.
Factors that exist everywhere at sea.
Exactly. Factors that cause incidents globally, but maybe here, because of the existing legend, they get amplified or misinterpreted.
Okay, so let's unpack some of those natural phenomena then.
Yeah.
Mystery aside, what makes this area potentially hazardous, just like any other busy stretch of ocean?
Well, first, and maybe most obviously, it's just incredibly busy. It's one of the world's most heavily traveled shipping lanes and air routes.
A major highway on the water.
You got it. Gateway to ports all over the Americas, the Caribbean. So, purely statistically, with that much traffic, you're just going to have more incidents, collisions, mechanical failures, you name it.
Okay, simple probability. And geographically, you mentioned it's not always smooth sailing.
Far from it. It's right in the path of many Atlantic tropical storms and hurricanes. These can whip up incredibly violent seas, sometimes very quickly.
And the Gulf Stream runs through there.
A very powerful, fast-moving current that makes navigation tricky, it causes rapid weather changes, and crucially, it can sweep away debris or wreckage incredibly quickly, making search and rescue efforts really, really difficult.
So finding things is hard anyway.
Extremely hard. Plus, you've got lots of shallow waters, reefs around the islands, treacherous, especially in bad weather, or if you make a navigational error.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about the compass thing? That always sounded uniquely spooky, the idea that compasses just go haywire there.
Yeah.
Magnetic anomalies.
Yes, that's a really persistent part of the lore. The theory is some strange magnetic force messes with navigation, and there's a grain of truth that gets twisted.
How so?
Well, it is true that this area is one of the few places on Earth where, historically, magnetic north, where the compass needle points, and true geographic north aligned more closely than in other places. This phenomenon is called magnetic variation, or declination.
Right, compass variation. But navigators are trained to account for that, aren't they? It changes depending on where you are on Earth.
Exactly. It's a known factor in navigation. And experts, like those at the U.S. Navy and Geological Surveys, are quite clear. First, that perfect alignment hasn't really been the case in the triangle since the 19th century anyway, due to the slow drift of the magnetic pole. Second, even when variation is zero or changing, it's a known, predictable phenomenon that trained pilots and mariners routinely correct for.
So it's not some mysterious force.
No. And crucially, scientific surveys show there are no unusual magnetic disturbances or anomalies within the Bermuda Triangle area itself. The nearest significant magnetic anomaly is actually way off the coast of Brazil, thousands of miles away.
Okay, so the compasses go wild idea is mostly myth, based on a misunderstanding of basic navigation principles.
That seems to be the expert consensus, yes. It sounds dramatic, but the reality is more mundane.
All right. What about another big theory? Methane hydrates.
The undersea gas eruptions.
Yeah, the idea that the ocean floor can suddenly release huge bubbles of methane gas and ships above lose buoyancy and sink, like the ocean floor burping.
Slight chuckle. That's kind of the idea.
NOAA scientists once humorously called it oceanic flatulence, which paints a picture. The theory is that a massive release could drastically lower the density of the water in that spot.
Making a ship drop like a stone. Could it affect planes, too?
Some versions of the theory suggest it might stall engines if gas concentrations were high enough. It sounds pretty dramatic.
But is there evidence for it happening there and causing these specific disappearances?
That's where the theory really hits a snag, according to the sources. First, physicists have questioned whether bubbles rising from the depths would actually maintain enough coherence and force to sink a large vessel. They tend to disperse.
More importantly, geological surveys, like those by the USGS, have found no evidence of recent large-scale methane releases in the Bermuda Triangle area that could account for the pattern of disappearances. Methane hydrates exist on seabeds all over the world, not just there.
So while gas blowouts can happen, there's nothing linking them specifically to the famous triangle incidents.
Not empirically, no. It remains a speculative idea without strong supporting evidence for that location and those events.
Okay, what about giant waves?
Right.
Rogue waves, are those real?
Oh, rogue waves are absolutely real and terrifying. These aren't just big storm waves. They're unusually large, steep, often unexpected waves, sometimes reaching heights of, say, 100 feet or more.
A wall of water, basically.
Pretty much. The theory related to the triangle is that because storms can converge there from different directions, say a local thunderstorm meeting ocean swells from a distant hurricane, the wave patterns could, theoretically, interact in a way that generates these monsters.
And simulations show they could sink ships.
Yes, computer simulations have shown that waves of that magnitude could certainly overwhelm and sink ships, especially older designs, maybe like the USS Cyclops.
That sounds plausible, potentially, but is there proof they happen more often in the triangle? Or that they caused the specific disappearances we talk about?
And that's the missing link. Again, while it's theoretically possible for converging storms to create rogue waves there, just like in other parts of the world known for complex sea states, like off South Africa,
Right.
there's no direct evidence proving that rogue waves are responsible for the famous triangle incidents, or that they occur there with statistically greater frequency than in other storm-prone ocean regions. It's another potential natural hazard, but not necessarily a unique triangle phenomenon.
Okay, so the natural phenomena, storms, currents, maybe rogue waves, treacherous shallows, they explain how disasters can happen at sea anywhere. But the evidence doesn't seem to show they happen unusually often in the triangle itself.
That seems to be the consensus from the scientific and official bodies.
Which brings us back to the other main factor they cite, the human element.
Human error. It's consistently highlighted by experts and official reports as a major, if not the primary, contributing factor in a vast number of maritime and aviation incidents worldwide. The Bermuda Triangle area is no exception.
Things like navigation mistakes, misjudging the weather.
Exactly. Navigation errors, especially before widespread GPS. Poor decision-making, underestimating conditions, mechanical failures due to poor maintenance, running out of fuel, all the standard tragic reasons accidents happen.
It seems almost too simple. But in the vastness of the ocean, under pressure, maybe in bad weather, a simple mistake could snowball, right?
Absolutely. And sources point to something quite striking. A high percentage of incidents, especially involving smaller private boats or planes, involve individuals who weren't necessarily experienced or formally trained for navigating those challenging offshore conditions. Yeah, one source cited a 2016 Coast Guard figure suggesting something like 82% of incidents in the area that year involved people without formal sea training. You might have people relying on inadequate tools way offshore, like using road maps instead of nautical charts or expecting cell phone service where there isn't any.
That really puts the Flight 19 incident in perspective again, doesn't it? Even with trained Navy pilots, the initial report leaned heavily on the idea of the experienced leader becoming disoriented.
It does. It highlights how even trained professionals can make critical errors under stress or due to unforeseen circumstances, let alone less experienced individuals. So the combination of those environmental challenges, which again exist globally, and human factors, seems to account for the vast majority of incidents, according to organizations like the Coast Guard and NOAA.
Okay, so the scientific and official view points pretty strongly towards, well, normal, albeit sometimes tragic, explanations, natural causes, human error. But let's be honest.
That's not nearly as exciting as the weird stuff.
Exactly, and that's why the weird, the wild, the speculative theories are such a big part of this, right?
Right.
Even if they lack solid evidence.
Oh, absolutely. They're undeniably part of the Bermuda Triangle's identity. They capture our imagination in a way that Poor maintenance or navigational error just doesn't.
Like portals to other dimensions, time warps. That
Yeah.
feels like pure science fiction.
It does. That whole cluster of ideas often revolves around something called electronic fog.
Electronic fog.
Yeah, there's a famous account from a pilot named Bruce Gernon back in 1970. He claimed she flew into this strange, swirling cloud, experienced bizarre electronic malfunctions, rapid travel covering 100 miles in just minutes, and even time distortion. He called it a time storm.
Wow.
And from there, you get speculation about, cosmic recycling bins, stargates, passages to other realities.
Okay, that's pretty out there. Then there's the classic aliens.
Can't have a good mystery without aliens, right? The idea that the triangle is a UFO hotspot and ships and planes aren't just disappearing, they're being abducted.
That's been huge in pop culture, like in Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Exactly. Or shows like Ancient Aliens. Some theories even get specific, speculating about secret underwater alien bases located deep within the triangle's trenches.
And what about the Atlantis connection? Berlitz was big on that, right?
He certainly helped popularize it. This theory links the disappearances to the legendary lost city of Atlantis. The idea is that maybe its powerful energy crystals or leftover advanced technology are still active on the seabed, somehow disrupting modern ships and planes.
Is there any physical evidence cited for that?
Sometimes the Bimini Road is brought up. It's an underwater rock formation near Bimini Island that looks vaguely like paving stones or a wall. Some see it as remnants of Atlantis.
But archaeologists,
Mainstream archaeology generally considers it a natural geological formation, beach rock. There's no credible archaeological support for an Atlantis connection there, or anywhere else for that matter.
okay. And government conspiracies, there's usually one of those.
Yep, briefly mentioned in some sources is the theory involving the U.S. Navy's Ayutthaya base, the Atlantic Undersea Test and Evaluation Center, located in the Bahamas, right in the triangle.
What's the theory there?
That the Navy isn't just testing subs and sonar, but maybe experimenting with captured alien technology or secret advanced tech of their own, and that these experiments are somehow causing the disappearances, perhaps accidentally or not.
Right. Always the secret government angle. Any other weird ones?
Oh, people get creative. You hear mentions of maybe a downed comet on the ocean floor emitting strange energies, or even trying to bring back historical piracy as an explanation for modern disappearances, though that doesn't really hold water for recent, well-documented cases.
It really seems like when faced with something unknown, especially something as vast and powerful as the ocean, our human tendency is just to grasp for the most extraordinary explanation possible.
Especially when those explanations are fueled by really compelling, dramatic stories.
Yeah. And that brings us to maybe the most crucial part of this deep dive, looking at how the myth itself was constructed. How did it get so big? Because some researchers have really dug into the origins of the legend.
This is where Larry Kucha's work is so important.
His book, The Bermuda Triangle Mystery Solved.
Exactly. Published back in 1975, not long after Berlitz's bestseller, Kucha was a librarian and pilot, and he didn't just offer alternative theories. He went back to the primary sources. He looked at the original newspaper reports, naval records, weather reports for the dates of the famous incidents that writers like Gaddis and Berlitz cited.
And what did he find by doing that actual legwork?
He found, basically, that the mystery was built on incredibly shaky foundations. He discovered that many of the claims made in the popular books were based on simple mistakes, significant exaggerations, or sometimes what seemed like outright fabrications.
So bad reporting.
A lot of it, yeah. He noted that many writers, Berlitz included, seemed to just repeat earlier, often inaccurate, accounts without doing their own independent fact-checking. They'd cite each other, creating this echo chamber where errors and sensational claims got amplified and presented as fact.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Kucha found instances where Berlitz, for example, described disappearances happening in calm, sunny weather when official weather records clearly showed major storms or even hurricanes were active in the area at the time.
That changes the picture significantly.
Absolutely. He also found cases where ships listed as vanished in the triangle actually disappeared thousands of miles away, or ships that were claimed to have vanished mysteriously were later found to have sunk due to known mundane causes like explosions or structural failure. Sometimes ships mentioned didn't even seem to exist at all.
Wow. So some of the core evidence for the triangle's unique deadliness just dissolved under scrutiny.
That was Kucha's major conclusion, and it's been echoed by other skeptical investigators since. His research suggested Berlitz's books, while incredibly popular, were, quote, riddled with errors and based on sloppy research.
It makes you think about how easily misinformation can spread, especially if it's a good story.
Definitely. Carl Sagan also touched on this, making that statistical point again. He wasn't denying ships and planes disappeared there, but argued it wasn't mysterious because it's a huge, busy ocean area where accidents happen and things sink.
Right, his analogy about trains disappearing in Chicago, that would be weird.
Hmm.
But boats sinking in the ocean, that's sadly expected sometimes.
Precisely. It's about the baseline expectation for the environment.
And you said earlier the official bodies, the Coast
Hmm.
Guard, NOAA, even Lloyd's of London,
Yeah.
they don't treat it as an unusually risky zone.
Correct. Their operational procedures, their insurance rates, their public statements all indicate they don't view the area as statistically more dangerous than other comparable ocean regions. One source mentioned a 2013 study by the WWF on global shipping dangers, and the Bermuda Triangle didn't even crack the top 10 most dangerous waters.
Okay, but what about the fact that wreckage is often missing? That's part of the spookiness, right? Things vanish without a trace.
That ties back to the natural factors we discussed, which apply to any deep ocean area. The Atlantic in that region is incredibly vast and includes some extremely deep trenches, like the Puerto Rico Trench, which is over 27,000 feet deep.
Deeper than Mount Everest is tall.
Exactly. Combine that depth with the powerful swirling currents of the Gulf Stream, which can rapidly disperse debris over huge distances or carry it far from the last known position.
And finding anything becomes like looking for a needle in a haystack.
A very, very large, very deep, constantly moving haystack. Even with modern sonar and search technology, locating wreckage in the deep ocean anywhere on Earth is incredibly challenging and expensive. So the lack of wreckage isn't necessarily evidence of the supernatural. It's often a testament to the ocean's ability to conceal things.
So if the evidence points so strongly towards natural explanations and human error, and we know the legend itself was built, at least partly, on exaggeration and misinformation,
Yeah.
why? Why does the myth of the Bermuda Triangle still hold such power? Why are we still talking about it?
I think it taps into something really fundamental about us. Humans seem to have this deep fascination with mystery, with the unknown. And the ocean, it's vast, it's deep, it's powerful, much of it is still unexplored. It represents one of the last great wildernesses on our planet.
So it's a natural place to project our fears and fantasies.
I think so. And those early sensational stories like Flight 19, the Cyclops, they were incredibly dramatic and compelling. They lodged themselves in our collective imagination.
And once the legend was established, maybe new incidents just got automatically sucked into it, like confirmation bias.
That seems very likely. The Bermuda Triangle became a ready-made explanation, a framework. So if a small boat got caught in a sudden storm with an inexperienced captain and vanished, something that happens unfortunately often worldwide, instead of just being a tragic accident, it gets labeled as another victim of the triangle.
Fueled by more books, movies, TV shows.
And now, of course, the internet. Viral videos, endless forum discussions, hashtags like hashtag Bermuda Glitch. The legend constantly gets refreshed and re-amplified in pop culture. It's a really powerful example of how narrative, especially a mysterious one, can sometimes override or overshadow more mundane, factual explanations.
So bringing this all back to you, the listener tuning in, why does doing this deep dive into the Bermuda Triangle actually matter? What's the takeaway?
Well, for one, I think it's a fantastic case study in critical thinking. And looking closely at sources, questioning narratives, especially sensational ones, it really highlights the power of storytelling and how easily a compelling story can spread and persist even when the factual basis is shaky. Media literacy, basically.
And maybe it's also a reminder to appreciate the sheer power and, frankly, the inherent dangers of the natural world itself.
Absolutely. Sometimes the most straightforward explanation, powerful storms, strong currents, the immense scale of the ocean, combined with human fallibility, is the correct one. Nature itself is often awe-inspiring and terrifying enough without needing to invoke the supernatural.
Does modern technology change things? GPS, better weather forecasting.
It definitely improves safety and transparency, yes. GPS makes navigation far more precise. Satellite monitoring tracks weather systems better. Emergency beacons, EPRBs, improve rescue chances. It's perhaps harder now for vessels or aircraft to simply vanish without any data trail in the way they might have in, say, the 1940s or 60s. Maybe making it harder for new mysteries of this specific type to take root.
Okay, so to wrap up this deep dive then, we've looked at those Famous, compelling disappearances that really launched the Bermuda Triangle legend.
The stories that grab you. But we've contrasted that with the scientific evidence, the official views from organizations like NOAA and the Coast Guard, which overwhelmingly point towards natural forces, storms, currents, geography, and very significantly, human error. Things common to all busy waterways.
Right. We touched on those wild, captivating theories, aliens, portals, Atlantis, that capture the imagination but, lack any real empirical evidence.
And we've explored how the myth itself seems to have been constructed and amplified over time, often based on exaggeration, factual errors, and the repetition of inaccurate information. But it persists because, well, we love good mystery.
The evidence really does seem to lean heavily towards the more prosaic realities of ocean travel, weather, and human mistakes, rather than vortexes or UFOs.
That's where the weight of the investigation seems to fall.
So maybe the final question for you to think about is this. Given everything we've uncovered, is the true lingering mystery of the Bermuda Triangle not really where all their ships and planes went, but why we as humans seem so determined, almost eager, to find a supernatural explanation when the natural ones seem to fit the facts?